This video is brought to you by Brilliant. On Friday, 4 gunmen carried out a mass shooting in Crocus City Hall, a concert hall on the western edge of Moscow. As of Sunday evening, the death toll stands at 133, making it the most lethal terror attack in Russia since the 2004 Beslan hostage crisis. While the Kremlin and many commentators originally seemed to blame Ukraine, on Saturday ISIS claimed responsibility, and it quickly became clear that the perpetrators were Islamists from Tajikistan. So in this video, we're going to have a look at what we know so far, how it's a symptom of ISIS's recent resurgence, and why this puts Putin in an exceptionally difficult spot. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's just start with what we know so far. After the attack, the 4 suspects got back in their car and drove down the M3 highway, which connects Moscow to Russia's border with Ukraine. They were intercepted by the FSB in a rural area near the village of Katsun in Bryansk, where they were then interrogated, and videos of their interrogations and torture quickly appeared online. In these recordings, the terrorists claimed to be from Tajikistan and claimed that they were paid 500,000 rubles to carry out the shooting. The attack has since been claimed by ISIS Khorasan, a branch of ISIS based in Central Asia and Afghanistan, and body cam footage of the attack was posted on ISIS-affiliated websites over the weekend. This is the latest in a series of attempted Islamist terror attacks in Russia recently. On March the 3rd, the FSB announced that they'd neutralised an ISIS terror cell in Ingushetia, killing 6 militants. And on March the 7th, the same day the US Embassy issued an alert warning Americans in Russia to stay away from, quote, large gatherings, the FSB said that they'd neutralised an IS-linked terrorist cell in Moscow, intending to attack a synagogue. US officials have since told CBS News that they had obtained further intelligence showing ISIS was planning another attack in Russia, and informed Russian authorities earlier last week that, as part of the US's duty to warn policy, which requires American security services to notify individuals or groups if they become aware of specific and credible threats to their safety without discrimination. However, Putin publicly dismissed these warnings as, quote, blackmail earlier this month. Now, the idea of an ISIS attack might feel a bit odd, if not implausible. After all, ISIS sort of peaked in 2014, when they controlled about a third of Syria and 40% of Iraq, but they've since lost 95% of their former territory, and the frequency of ISIS terrorist attacks, at least in Europe, has declined markedly in the past decade. However, ISIS, or specifically ISIS Khorasan, has experienced a partial resurgence in the past few years or so. For context, ISIS Khorasan, often abbreviated to just ISIS-K, was formed in 2015 in Afghanistan as an offshoot of the Pakistani Taliban, and has spent most of its existence attacking the Afghan Taliban for apparently not being sufficiently Islamist. ISIS-K have also always had strong relations with Tajik Islamist groups, both because Tajikistan is one of the most conservative and Islamic countries in the world, and because significant cross-border migration between the two countries occurred as a consequence of the Tajik and Afghan civil wars in the 90s. Anyway, before the US withdrawal in 2021, American airstrikes contained ISIS-K to eastern Afghanistan. But since the Taliban took power, ISIS-K have spread throughout Afghanistan, and recently started carrying out attacks outside the country. Earlier this year, ISIS militants carried out a brutal suicide bombing in Iran during a memorial for IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani, and killed at least 43 people in an assault on a political rally in northern Pakistan last July. Just a day before Friday's attack near Moscow, the group carried out a suicide bombing in the Afghan city of Kandahar, killing at least 20 people, including several members of the Taliban. Tellingly, the Taliban actually condemned the Crocus Hall attack on Sunday, saying in a statement, "We condemn in the strongest terms the recent terror attack in Moscow and consider it a blatant violation of all human standards." So, how does the Kremlin respond to all this? Well, this is obviously an enormous and embarrassing security failure, not least because Russia was warned by the US and because it apparently took the Moscow police roughly an hour to respond, despite the fact there's a National Guard base just 10 minutes down the road. This is uniquely embarrassing for Putin, because a key part of his social contract with the Russian public is that he'll provide stability and security in exchange for untrammeled power, While most of the international media has focused on how this affects Ukraine, and we'll get onto that in a second, within Russia a lot of this debate has centred around Putin's migration policies. For context, both to address Russia's demographic decline and to provide a reliable source of cheap labour, Putin has pursued a conspicuously liberal migration policy for the last few years, especially with Russia's Central Asian neighbours. Astonishingly, nearly 200,000 Tajiks acquired Russian citizenship in 2022 alone, and it's not implausible to assume something like 1 million Tajiks, 10% of Tajikistan's entire population, currently live in Russia. Friday's terror attack will put pressure on Putin to take a significantly harsher stance on immigration. But this will be difficult because, thanks to Russia's enormous stimulus to fund the war in Ukraine, Russia's economy is already running hot, with inflation running at about 8% and unemployment down to a record low. Reducing immigration would trigger a worker shortage, risking higher wages and therefore inflation, or even a wage price spiral. Concurrently, inflation is already pushed up by Ukraine's attacks on Russian oil refineries, which is making gasoline markedly more expensive in Russia. But the big question is whether Putin will blame Ukraine. If ISIS were indeed behind the attack, which seems likely at this point, this creates a difficult dilemma for Putin. If he accepts that ISIS are responsible, he'll come under pressure to rebalance his foreign policy away from Ukraine towards the Islamist threats from Central Asia and restrict Central Asian immigration, which wouldn't be great from Putin's perspective. This is why Putin might try to blame Ukraine anyway, perhaps by claiming that they paid the Tajiks to carry out the shooting and then leaked the videos to ISIS-affiliated media. There are already tentative signs that this is his plan. In a speech delivered in the aftermath of the event, the Russian president said that Ukraine had opened, quote, a border window to the terrorists as they tried to escape Russia, although he refrained from blaming the Ukrainian government outright. But while blaming Ukraine might appease more gullible Russians and provide him with an excuse to escalate against Ukraine, it's also a risky tactic. Too much information has already been shared publicly by the FSB, so everyone in Russia already knows the suspects were Tajik Islamists, not Ukrainians. But also, if the US actually forewarned Russia, they could release the intelligence publicly to prove both that ISIS were responsible and that Russia was warned. All in all, while there are still lots of unknowns, who paid the terrorists, where they were driving to, at the moment, it looks like Putin is in a tough spot. Now, understanding exactly what has or is going to happen here can be a little tricky, requiring you to evaluate lots of information from different, often partial sources. It would be sensible then to begin improving your critical thinking skills so that you can keep sharp and better understand what's going on. And, well, our sponsor, Brilliant.org, can help you do just that. Brilliant is the online learning platform that's designed specifically to teach you everything from maths, data analysis, programming, and AI from the ground up. You don't need a fancy degree or to have dedicated hundreds of hours to studying any of these. All you need is a device with an internet connection and a few spare minutes a day. And with your spare few minutes, you'll learn by actually doing, with Brilliant providing hands-on lessons that help you play around with concepts, a method that has been shown to be 6 times more effective than just watching lectures. What makes this even better is that this content is created by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, and more. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description. And that way, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.